Expectancy and expecting the best also increases power. It increases power and ability. Now, how does it do it? I'm going to break this down for you. And firstly, expectancy strengthens courage. Have you ever watched an Arkansas game and it looked like they walked on the field before the timer ever started and they were expecting to lose? The same thing happens in life like it does every sporting event where that happens, because attitude matters. If an athlete takes the field expecting to win, they play differently than someone who expects to lose. Confidence does not replace ability. It releases it. And just as it's true in athletics, it's also true in a Christian life. There's nothing more important than the attitude in the life of a church. A church that expects God to work, expects God to save, expects God to move is a church that will experience the victory of Christ over sin and Satan. But it's also true in your life, each and every day. You see, when David stepped onto that battlefield in verse 48, what does it say? It says, "And then it happened, the Philistine came closer to meet David, that David did what? David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine." He didn't hesitate. He didn't freeze. Expectancy gave him the courage to face what stood before him. But it does something else. Expectancy also releases God's strength. Because we all know what David did, what David used, right? He reached into his bag and he took out a stone and he slung it. And that stone found the only place on Goliath's body that was unprotected, his forehead. Now, folks, that's not coincidence. That is truly supernatural. Yes, David was skilled with a sling, but let's be honest, he's facing a man that's 9 feet tall, covered in armor and hardened by war. He didn't have a humanistic chance to win. But David did not fight on his own ability. He fought expecting God to work, and it increased his strength. He expected God to honor what God had promised, and God then multiplied it beyond human ability. So when you expect the best, God, His strength meets your obedience and gives you the strength for any situation. But here's the third thing it does. Expectancy also refuses excuses. Have you ever heard somebody ask you this question? Well, Matt, if what you're saying is true, the Bible tells us that he picked up 5 stones, not 1. So why did he have extra ammunition if he had so much faith? Well, we know the answer, right? Scripture also gives us that answer. It's in 2 Samuel. If you wanted to turn there, but it's in 2 Samuel 21:22. What is the answer? The answer is that Goliath had 4 brothers. And it says there in 2 Samuel 21, verse 22, these 4 were born to the giant at Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. David was not doubting by grabbing more than 1 stone. He was simply planning on the future endeavors that God was going to provide him. He wasn't doubting the outcome there. He was planning for victory. He said, when this one falls, I'm ready for the rest of them. So expectancy doesn't mean carelessness. It means the confidence based on what God has promised. And it teaches us something so vitally important today, that we should never, ever, ever use lack of ability as an excuse for not serving God. But how many of us say that? I can't. I can't because I'm not educated enough. I'm not gifted enough. I'm not young enough. I'm not old enough. I'm not experienced enough. In this situation in 1 Samuel 17, David was none of those things. Yet God used him mightily and powerfully. Because God does not require ability. He responds to expectancy. And He blesses according to faith. But now here's the last thing. Expectancy faces reality without fear. Now, I know some people say, well, preacher, aren't you really telling us just to ignore reality in this? No, I'm not. Because faith does not deny reality, but it does refuse to be ruled by it. You see, we find this so often throughout Scripture. Paul said, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Do you remember what Jeremiah said at the beginning of his ministry? He said, I am too young. What did Moses say? I cannot speak. What did Amos say? I am untrained. What about Abraham? He said, I am too old. But when God expected them to serve, and they did, their ability increased and their weakness decreased. So here's the truth. A Christian never has to be intimidated by an impossible situation. In fact, the next time you think of that word, you should listen closely, because heaven has not learned the meaning of that word.